In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the merciful. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our course Globalization and Spread of English. Our today's topic is role and attitude toward the use of English in subcontinent. As we are discussing about in our previous lectures, we have discussed about the arrival of British into subcontinent. So we have discussed many factors on how they entered into subcontinent, what was their mission, what were their purposes, or what were their intentions. So if, apart from this today, we will discuss just about the role and attitudes of the nations who were residing over there when British people came into subcontinent. So was that role and attitudes was normal and it was taken as a normal activity, or was it was what we can say that was it a negative attitude, or was it a positive attitude? So we will discuss about the in this context under this heading of role and attitudes towards the use of English language. By the role and attitudes will be discussed by the Hindus and Muslims, because mainly there were two nations, although there were other nations were also staying over there in subcontinent when British came here, but mainly there were two major nations that we can say, Muslims and Hindus. So, somewhere around 1600, the English diplomat Sir Thomas Rao, in return of some services, got the permission to build trade relations between Mughal Empire and Britain, and as a result, the British East India Company was emerged. So, sorry. There were other factors also apart from this emergence of East India Company. There were some other factors. What were those factors? With the passage of time, the Mughal Empire was on decline, and this was when British decided to take the game further. They want to expand their, what we can say, expand their intentions or expand their game. The rule of power plays that when nations are stronger, they expand. So, due to the weak policies of the Muslim rulers at that time, the power was shifted to the stronger side. And what was the stronger side at that time? British was taken the stronger side. So, naturally, English, the language of victors, became the official language of the British colony. So, attitude of Muslims and Hindus when British came here in the subcontinent, and with the arrival of British, their civilization, it was a very greater effects on the communities who are staying here, namely or notably, there were two major nations, Hindus and Muslims, and there was a great effect on them because with the arrival of British people. So, in what way they took it, serious or non-serious, or it's a greater effect, or it's a positive or negative? So let's discuss later. So, Battle of Plassey, which was held on 1757, it is what we can say initial steps by the British people when they got success in subcontinent, although they were planning to come in this land and to rule the people, to snatch the resources, or to occupy the other things, or other, what we can say, other industries, as we have discussed in our previous lecture. So but they were not succeeding a lot. But Battle of Plassey, it was the first step when they got success somehow in subcontinent. So when British came here, which areas they selected for their purposes, for their intentions to expand their business, trade, or other missionary purposes. So they selected the coastal areas, among them at that time of Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. These cities were included. So they selected the coastal areas, and in coastal areas, majority of the inhabitants were Hindu people, and they welcomed a lot to new rulers, and it didn't take much difference for them, for Hindus, because they were being ruled by the foreigners for more than centuries. So there was no greater difference for the Hindu community. As Muslim community is concerned, it was a great blow on the faces of the Muslims nation. So they took it very serious. They became very aggressive, and they didn't forget their ruling duration and their rule when they were in subcontinent. So they didn't forget their supremacy over other nations, and when they were ruled by other nation, by other what we can say a new ruler, so they didn't like this idea to be ruled by other nations in subcontinent, even their own land. So this attitude on the part of Hindus toward the British and their civilization brought them many advantages, because Hindu, as we all know, Hindu is very clever nation, very sharp, and somehow we can say a cunning nation. So they understood the phenomena, that in what way they must behave with the new rulers. So they stood by, although in some what we can say, on some occasions they stood by with the Muslim community, but very few of them, they always stood by the new rulers, because inwardly they didn't like Muslims, or that's why they wanted to take revenge from Muslims community. Although Muslims community is a very wonderful period they have spent over there while ruling the subcontinent, and their treatment with the other people was very good, but it was an excellent period uh, under the rule of Muslims, leader of Muslim, uh, what we can say, rulers. But inwardly they didn't like to be ruled more by the Muslim community. So when British came here, the Hindu community liked this idea very much, and they always welcome to every activity, welcome them. So, as a result, when they stood by the British people, and as the Muslims were facing many difficulties, there were many hindrances, there were many uh, troubles and difficulties. They couldn't stand by the British altogether, because there was mainly the problem was the problem of religion. The next was the problem of the civilization. Third was the problem of the, because they were, what we can say, their rule was threatened by the British people. So the Hindus were indeed the main, if not the only, beneficiaries of the British rule. So they got services, they got jobs in the government, because they were very active at that time. They availed themselves of the many opportunities that the British offered in all spheres of life. By embracing Western education and culture, they became trusted subjects. Trusted subjects, yes. And as the Muslims, they were not trusted subjects. Subjects mean people, mass, people, awam, what they say in Urdu. So trusted subjects were the Hindus, not the Muslims, in the eyes of the new rulers. And by learning the English language, they were offered services in the government also. Hindus were offered government services and good jobs, not the not the Muslims community. So Muslims were too in white, rejected the British policies. So they didn't welcome the new rulers, because of many factors. First one, there was the religion, then civilization, then the authority or power was threatened by the new rulers. So Hindu were the initiators to realize the importance of English language so that they could communicate with their new rulers, their new sovereign masters. So as Muslims had a long history of being ruled, so they took this change as a blow to their cultural and religious values that we are discussing already. So they thought that their dignity and dominance was compromised. See, they didn't like this idea. Why they must do compromise on their power, on their dignity, on their values, on their religion, on their culture. So that's why it must not be it must not be done by the British ruler. They must not rule the subcontinent, otherwise all of the things will be at risk. So they refrained from learning English and preferred to promote their own language, Persian, Arabic and Turkish. So these were the indigenous languages, these were the languages of the rulers, these were the languages of the elite class or the educated people. So when British came here, they changed the paradigm. They changed, or they, in most of the cases as we have discussed, Macaulay, he criticized the local languages and he said that these languages are no longer giving part or taking part in any new knowledge. So these are the old languages, so they must be abandoned, they must not be promoted. Instead of these local languages, indigenous language, there must be English language. So that's why and the Muslims community didn't like this idea because there around three languages were being obsoleted or being abandoned, so they didn't like their old language. Although the Sanskrit was also included in this old languages, the British criticized the Persian, Arabic, and Turkish and Sanskrit also because they say all these are the local languages. In 1835, English language was established as a part of education in schools, colleges, and universities. Hindu took part, whereas the Muslims remained indifferent. They didn't take part. They didn't learn English language. So when British came here, as we are discussing about the religion, culture, civilization, power, and language. The fifth one is the language. The Muslims' language, the local language, the indigenous language was threatened by the new rulers. So they didn't take part in any activities and they didn't send their children to the schools set by British or where the English language was promoted, so they didn't took part. Whereas Hindu like the idea, Hindu they learned the English language and they were very active members. So, trusted subjects, as we have discussed, trusted subjects, they became trusted subjects. Britain Christian missionaries played a major role of spreading English language by establishing schools across the region, which also promoted Christianity. So, as we have discussed in our earlier lectures, that there were three-folded agenda. Number one, there was a trade mission, and number two, there was what we can say missionary purpose, or number three, there was a promotion of language or their own language or English language. So other factors, apart from other factors, missionary purpose has also played a major role in this regard to promote their Christianity. So the official establishment owes its foundation to D.B. Macaulay. It's not a Lord Macaulay. It's D.B. Macaulay and then Governor General. English became a compulsory subject in academic sphere and the language of the elite class. As before, there were the local languages or Turkish, Arabic, Persian, or Sanskrit, and the Turkish was the language of the ruler, or Arabic or Persian was the language of the elite class or educated class. But now the paradigm was changed. Now English became the language of the elite class, upper class, instead of their local languages. So by learning English, Hindus were able to secure status better than Muslims in the eyes of the British, and consequently were rewarded in the form of being embedded in the bureaucratic post of civil services. They got higher jobs, they got good jobs, and they were because they were trusted subjects. So this staying aloof gave birth to the gulf between Muslims and British. So because they remained indifferent, they didn't take part in any activities set by British. They didn't send their children to English schools. They didn't learn English language. So they remained indifferent. So they, because of this, they are, but we can say disparity was being increased between these two nations, between Muslims and British. So which further intensified their relations, resulting into the War of Independence of 1857. So various contents of literature were also translated into English, which also promoted both the English and Indo-Muslim culture. English became the language of the instruction, and English-speaking Indians were hired as teachers of the language for the native people. And again, Muslims were deprived to get these sorts of jobs. So many changes were brought by the new ruler when British came here, or what was the things what, that were being practiced by the old rulers. They changed the establishment, they changed the law, they changed the courts, they changed the education systems. So the many other reforms were taken by the new rulers. So Indians and particularly Muslims were to suffer the most politically, economically, as well as psychologically. As Maslow wrote, it was argued that psychologically they, especially Muslims, hadn't recovered from their loss of power when they were supplanted as rulers of the subcontinent by the British, and that they lived in the past in a nostalgic world of former glories. So Muslims were being gradually replaced by Hindus. First, they gradually replaced by British. They lost their power, they lost their rule, they lost each and everything. So next, instead, they became active or trusted subjects. They refrained, they became aloof, they became separate from, not only from Hindus, they became separate from British also. And then what we can say, there was a empty place, and there was empty space, that Hindus filled that space because no one was a rival over there. So when they found the place, the Hindus filled that place. According to Maslow, this process of Muslim being replaced by Hindus was set off when the East India Company replaced Persian or Urdu with the English language, and the later became the official language of the bureaucracy. So as a matter of fact, it was in 1835, namely during Lord Bateman's general governorship, that English was made the official language of government and legal business in the Indian subcontinent. So for the European Christian missionaries in India, that was not a new idea. Before this, they entered this land and they entered this to subcontinent with the purpose of trade, mission, or missionary purposes as well. So, but before, all the efforts were not successful, were not very successful. But later on, now they got success in after, as we have discussed in the Battle of Plassey. It was the first initial step regarding their conquest. toward this nation, toward this land. So although it was not a new idea to come on this land and to start their activities, but before this they were not successful, so now they were getting success. In the law courts, the position of Muslim officials was steadily undermined, and the British imposed their own procedure in the courts to supersede the ones already established by the Mughals emperors. So in Bengal, the fall from power was complete and catastrophic and was very disastrous. It was very uh, what we can say, very disappointing. The Muslim judges were discharged, the Islamic code was set aside in favor of the British regulations, and under Bentonic Persian was abandoned as court language. So Persian was refrained or restricted to be used in the court language. Instead, the English language was promoted. The fact of refusing to learn English language of the new conquerors, as well as their education, served as an impediment for Muslims to get or to continue to be in administrative posts under British rule, knowing that the English education was the only qualification that opened the door for government positions. So Muslim, as we have discussed, Muslim became aloof, they became indifferent, so they were not active to learn their language, so that's why they didn't get the opportunities to get progress, to be prosperous, to become prosperous. The Muslim didn't take to the English language and thus denied themselves opportunities of material as well as intellectual progress. Material, because government jobs were open only to English knowing persons. Intellectual, because the entire corpus of Western knowledge and learning was shut out from them. So, as there were two counterparts, Hindus and Muslims, Hindu managed better than their Muslim counterparts, and the latter lagged far behind. Muslims lagged far behind, so they didn't get progress. They didn't get prosperity, or they didn't get jobs or opportunities, as we have discussed already. As he attributes that Muslims' degeneration partly to the fact that the areas where Muslims were present, namely the northern regions, were the last to come under the British rule. So this could also be the reasons, because the more what we can say, the starting their starting point was the coastal areas, and the Hindus were staying over there, and the end part of that what we can say, the subcontinent, where Muslims were staying over there. So what we can say, that the difference, because of the distance and many other factors are also involved. So they were the at what we can say, they were staying at front line, and the Muslims were staying at the behind or back lines. So that's why they have although they have contact with the foreign rulers, but because they didn't want to interact more than, so this was also the reason. The distance was also the major factors. On the other hand, Muslims were avoiding to absorb alien ideas or methods or language of the new rulers. So not only the distance was a factor, there was a religion, there was a culture, there was a civilization, or there was a threat, or there was what we can say, hostility, because they snatched their rule. So that's why many other factors were involved, so they remain different. So thus they failed to grasp the opportunities available in the new structure of the government. So Muslim rejection of Western education and culture and their attitude towards their successors in the seat of power had indeed many reasons. So one of these reasons were imperial pride, because they remained rulers, so they wanted to be ruler. So and now they had lost their opportunities to be ruled over the land, or to rule over the people, over the subjects. So that's why. And in fact, we are, as Hindus were by nature too willing to submit to the rulers. There was a nature to be submitted, to be surrendered for the, it was a, what we can say, existed in the nature of the Hindu community, Hindu Muslims. And they were not rulers. They didn't know how to use their power, or that's why they were. There is a difference between a person who has authoritative mind and the person who has a slavery mind. So that sort of difference could be feel over there. So Muslims were too proud to their past glory to submit to the British. They took over the Indian subcontinent by the East India Company, proved to be a bitter pill for Muslims to swallow. They had been dethroned and couldn't reconcile themselves with the current situation. So what we can say, what we can feel here, the major differences, the major issues, the trouble, hindrances, and what we can say in simple words, all the issues were for Muslims. And Hindus, they, I think, although they were also suffered a lot with the Muslim community, but not the serious ones, what we can say. So Muslims were the most nation which was victimized by the new rulers, by the British people. So Muslims' hegemony was gone, and real power lay with the British. The Muslims who couldn't forget that they had once ruled over the land. So their reaction was bitter and aggressive. So didn't take it positive. They didn't like the idea uh, to be ruled by the foreign ruler, and that's why they were very aggressive and they were very hostile towards the British ruler. As a result, they developed a hostile attitude towards the British, whom they accused of expropriating their prestige, snatching their prestige. This made the Muslims community stay away from everything associated with the British, including their culture, language, and education as well. So naturally, to avoid coming under the influence of the new culture, they clung persistently to the fundamental teaching of Islam, and most of them prevented their children from attending British patronized educational institutions throughout the different Indian provinces. So, in this situation of disappointment and rejections and downfall of the Muslim rule, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan proved to be the first drop of the rain in this era of dejection and disappointment. And Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, pioneer of Renaissance movement, and he was considered the first person who realized that Muslim could not be restored, could not get progress, could not get prosperity unless they learn English language. So he wrote articles in English to reduce the disparity, or to reduce the remoteness of the Indians and British people. He also founded many schools where English language was promoted. He also laid foundation of a translation society where the various works were translated into English language, from different languages to English language. And in 1877, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, as you all know very well, he founded Aligarh College, which later on was changed into Aligarh University, where modern English was promoted. So these are the factors related to the role and attitudes, or negative attitude of the Muslim community at that time when British came here, and what sort of their thinking about their new rulers, what sort of thinking of the Muslim community about their new rulers. I'm sorry. So if we in our lives, if we examine the things, the main loss or major loss was for the Muslims, because the Hindus were the not ruler before British came in. Muslims were the rulers. Muslims were ruling all over the land, all over the subcontinent. So it was not a threat for the Hindus. That's why Hindu welcome British Raj, welcome British rule, because they just changed the rulers. They were subjects, they were trusted subjects. Also, they were the trusted subjects for the Muslim community. But now they proved themselves the trusted subjects for the British rule, for the new rulers. So they welcome with enthusiasm or enthusiastically, they gave warm welcome to the new ruler, whereas entangled Muslims were entangled many hardships, many difficulties, many troubles at that time. So it's the end of our today's lecture. Take care. Goodbye. Allah Hafiz.